there any other questions from the audience? Yeah? Okay.
I would like to ask.
Okay, all right, so you get... Please go ahead.
Yeah, my question is to Dr. Raghavan. In fact, continuing on the same theme, that do we really think that this terminology we often hear these days, gift economy, is that real or is that a figment of imagination? Will we see in future some sort of a new dimension emerging in economics which will blend the so-called exchange economics and gift economics? I would like to hear his comments and the comments from of other panelists.
Okay, let me take a crack at it. Can you hear me? Yeah. Then maybe some of the others could add to it. I think in economics as a discipline, there's a fairly well understood separation, first of all, between the theories of rational behavior and then actual rendition by human socioeconomic systems. The first comment I want to put in there is that if you look at rational behavior, as Professor Paul was saying, there tends to be a fixation on game theory and strategic equilibria. The thing I want to point out there is that the payoffs aren't necessarily monetary. Right? The payoffs really have to do with value in the system. It could be social value that you seek to optimize. It could be individual value. Okay? So right there, even rational theory does accommodate non-monetary incentives, and that's something the other speakers have already commented on. Right? Once you transport from that domain to human behavior, then it starts to open up a whole world of possibilities. Certainly in the examples that I spoke of earlier, there were already cases where people get fixated on things like the points they score. So there was a comment about leisure versus pain, and at some point I'm not sure if accumulating points in a video game is necessarily leisure or pain, right? But people pursue it absolutely. So once you get into that realm, from the rational to the behavioral, you have to allow for the possibility of alternate value systems that include gift economies and others. So I absolutely think that's the case.
Any other questions? Yeah.
The microphone is there.
Who has the microphone right now?
The question is about the incentive models that you are talking about. Incentive models are largely part of competitive models. Is it possible to sustain a social network, grow a social network in a competitive model? Can you bring in the element of competitive model into social networking? Is it feasible at all?
Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry, very sorry.
Yeah?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question is about when you talk about incentive, you are essentially creating a competition.
That's right.
Within the group. Okay. Now, the purpose of social network is not always to create competitive fissures, competitive friction. It's collaborative. Yes. Is it really possible to sustain and grow social networking through competitive model?
Yeah, that's very interesting question. Very fundamental and interesting.
Yeah.
First of all, the first part of question, the relation between degree of competition and degree of incentivization. The question says more incentives, more competition. Am I right? Yeah. I think not necessarily. Even under an oligarchist, or let's say one ruler, there's a king, and there are a set of slaves, 100 slaves. Among slaves, there's scope for incentivizing. So the relation is not, it doesn't have sufficiency. Such a relation can even exist under regimes like slavery. Even slaves can be given incentives, right? But the word competition is really, really powerful. It requires institutions, democratic institutions, fulfillment of basic norms of ethics. So, with these basic institutions of morality, ethics, democracy, and market forces, demand and supply, then that form competition. So, maybe by assuming that these institutions exist, to some extent, incentives can work, and incentives can really prompt competition, and beyond a stage it can break down. It's a mixed evidence. Second part of question, social networks. Can it be sustained with incentives, right? Is that the question? My belief, based on my reading and my hunch, social network, it's nothing but reflection of society. Society is sustained mainly through institutions. I would like to borrow from Douglas E. North, who won Nobel Prize in economics for working on institutions, who said institution is consisting of two things. One is formal rules, for instance, constitution, anything from judiciary. There's a hierarchy. Other side, informal rules. For instance, there is silence in this room, but nowhere it's written we should keep some silence, order. It's a norm. So institutions are very critical to have order or to make exchanges happen. So, very interesting question. If a social network is growing or sustained, exchanges are happening, what percent is because of institutions, what percent is because of incentives? Very interestingly, literature says incentives mainly arise from institutions. So I would say institutions.
Thank you. So one last question. It has to be a non-incentive question. Anyone?
How about the 6 degrees? It's for Prabhakar. Your colleague, while at Columbia, did this experiment on the internet. You never told us how many hops it took or the results.
So what I failed to tell you is how many hops it took, because the number of hops is actually a distribution. The number that sticks in people's head, like 6, was a median of Milgram's distribution. In Duncan's, I think it was Watson Strogatz who did the experiment, the average wasn't that far from 6, but the distribution was so large that that particular number is pretty meaningless, right? It also takes into account that experimental conditions change pretty dramatically from Milgram's world of the 60s, where acquaintanceships were pretty much by letter, to the internet, where you can look up people, do a search on people and so on. So the fact that Duncan and company were able to get something close to 6 doesn't necessarily confirm what Milgram said. That's why I consciously stayed away from stating the number. Right? The experiments have changed dramatically, and it also fails to still take into account the whole notion of, even if there were a short path between us, what's our likelihood of actually discovering that short path based only on limited knowledge of our locality. This has been studied in fairly stylized models by John Kleinberg at Cornell, but that work is very, very stylized and doesn't really apply yet to the real world.
Do we have time for one quick, short question? Okay, let's take it, yeah.
Hi, John Blossom, Shore Communications. On the 6 degrees, what seems to happen in practice in a platform such as LinkedIn is that you will use a trusted referral to get to a referral, period. So the question becomes, of what value is that 6 degrees concept, as you point out, since what people seem to trust is the people that they know most directly.
Yeah, and in particular, for truly valuable activity in a social network, it's fairly well documented that your strong ties, the close friends you have, aren't necessarily the most useful ones. If you haven't heard of this work, there's a book by Mark Granovetter, which is a thesis from the early 80s. I think the title is something like How to Find a Job or Looking for a Job. Even if you don't read it, you should leave it around on your desk so when your boss sees it, they panic that you're going to quit and add incentives to you. But one of the things Granovetter pointed out was that social networks, he was the first to point out that ties in social networks actually have multiple forms ranging, and he had a binary classification to strong and weak ties. And his thesis was that it's the weak ties that help you find jobs. Right? It's the people you meet every 6 months in a party, not the colleagues around you see every day. Right? And what we're learning in social networks today online is that simplistic separation of strong and weak is still far too simplistic. There's people who are your tennis partners, there's people who are, play in a band with you, or whatever it is, right? So links take on many colors, and learning how to navigate those colors successfully is an important part of this.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I think we'll have to close the questions. But because of our mobile social networking application, all of you can continue to comment, and there's even a QA forum in there, so you can continue to pose questions, and we'll try and figure out if we can get responses to you. And the last announcement is that there's a break between 5:30 to 7 when the evening session starts. So we're thinking of having an impromptu session for those of you who are interested on mobile social networking. And Venkat has agreed to coordinate this session. So if any of you would like to volunteer as panelists for that, please contact Venkat during the lunch break. So at this point, I'd like to thank all the panelists. And so let's thank them. And I guess we break for lunch now. Thank you.
Over the next hour and a half. The topic is social networking, Web 2.0, and mashups. And the panel that we have seems to know a little bit about that. Among the panelists, we have Dr. Jayanta Chatterjee, who's with IIT Kanpur. And he's got a pretty distinguished career before that. He holds a PhD and is a renowned practitioner with rigorous academic involvement. He started with Siemens as a sales engineer in 1972, pioneered the introduction of programmable control and advanced power electronic systems at Allen Bradley, and then became the president and CEO of that company in 1990. He's been chosen as the Manager of the Year by Delhi Management Association in 1994. He's been the co-founder and chief knowledge officer of Plex in California, a venture-funded CRM company during 2000-2001, and since then he's been faculty at the Industrial and Management Engineering Department at IIT Kanpur. He's a consultant, he's a coach, he's a renowned leader, so I'm really happy that he's with us today. Along with him, we've got a few more panelists. We've got Arun Ramanajapuram, who's with Yahoo India. He heads up the Advanced Technology Group at Yahoo Bangalore, and he's been focusing his interests on technology research and how it applies to the internet, primarily in the information extraction from the web and leveraging structured data to enable newer application in search, advertising, and web-based communities. He started his career at Xerox PARC, and he's got a long career before that. We'll wait for Arun to join us in a couple of minutes. Along with Arun and Dr. Chatterjee, we also have Kiruba Shankar. Kiruba is a pretty well-known entity in the Indian blogging Web 2.0 space. For those of you that don't know him, he's the CEO of Business Blogging Private Limited. He's also on the board of a company called F5 Technologies. And Kiruba is a really passionate teacher. If you hear him speak, you'll realize he speaks from his heart. And he's very passionate about teaching. He teaches at Anna University, Madras Advertising Club, Asian College of Journalism. He's a columnist. He writes for a bunch of cyber media publications, Hindu, Indian Express, Economic Times, DataQuest, etc. The Indian version of the Business World magazine ranks him as India's top 10 most influential bloggers. That's how I got to know Kiruba over the last year. He also holds a CEO product show called The Kiruba Show, and then he's got a bunch of other interests that I'm not going to go into. Last but not least, we've got Krish Ashok, or Ashok Krish, depending on whether you want to call his first name last. He's an architect with TCS, and his interesting perspective is at TCS, he's paid to basically spend time on social networks. And he's told me that, on flights and cabs, he spends a lot of his time playing Scrabble, right, on Facebook. And so he's one of the reasons why Facebook is a success, because the guy's addicted to it. And then I'm envious, because not only does he spend time playing Scrabble, a game that I love, but he also, gets paid to basically research how these social networks, how these Web 2.0 communities can be brought into the enterprise and impact the lives of people like you and I. So it'll be really interesting to hear his views as well. So those are the panelists that we have. What we thought we would do is we would start with Dr. Chatterjee giving his views on Web 2.0, primarily on Web 2.0 and mashups. And he's got an interesting tale about how this has not only impacted the typical internet penetration models that you think about, people in the 6 metropolitan cities and adjacent cities, but also how it affects rural India. So I'm really excited about listening to him. And then what we'll do is we'll break it up and come into a kind of a free-fall session where we'll ask individual panelists on their views on how social networking Web 2.0 has impacted their lives and how they've been able to leverage it. So instead of a whole bunch of theory, we'll talk about, why do people participate in social networks? What is it about Web 2.0 that makes it so exciting? We all know it exists, right? We all know Facebook's valued at $15 billion. Google just launched Open Social. Microsoft's made an investment. So it's the hype. It's the reality that's there today. But why do people participate? We look at examples on how these communities are changing business behavior and personal behavior. And then we'll also ask our panelists about, can you actually use these communities to drive specific behavior? So I don't know what kind of questions we'll be asking them, but along with you, we'll try and come up with interesting things, and let's try and keep it focused to how